because yeah, you will need to be in the but we can organize some sort of creative around it, like with the chairs.
Yeah, maybe we can get some.
I suggest not to keep people behind the tables. Ask them to negotiate.
Yes, I think that's. Thank you very much.
modern science, so it's called Medieval Visions of Modern Science. So if you have any interest in joining the Crossing Frontier network, or if your research or your event is something that would fit in our remit, just get in touch and we can advertise your event for you. So tonight, this evening, Dr. Matarrese will talk to us about savoring the Middle Ages through its herbs, but mostly about the iconography of Phytoalimurgia. And Dr. Matarrese is an expert in Germanic philology and in the history of English language, and she teaches Phytoalimurgia and ethnobotany at the University of Bari in Italy. Her expertise is in Edinburgh as a consultant in wild food and Phytoalimurgia. She is the director of Iskogen magazine and the author of the acclaimed La Cuoca Selvatica, or The Wild Cook. But she has recently published by 408 the Voynich manuscript, a pioneering exploration delving into human history, ancient knowledge, plant species identification, iconography analysis, and plant name transliteration within the so-called indecipherable codex. Beyond her scholarly pursuits, Dr. Matarrese shines as a distinguished professional forager, lending insights to scientific and popular publication. As a chef, for the revered Slow Cooked Alliance, she advocates for food education initiatives across Europe. Her fame as La Cuoca Selvatica, or the Wild Cook, precedes her, present screens as a featured personality on Italy's popular national TV show È sempre mezzogiorno. So I leave the stage to Eleonora.
Thanks.
And enjoy.
Thanks, Elisa. Thank you, and good evening. Thanks to the Crossing Frontiers Network and the Queen's University Belfast. I'm extremely glad to be here, and I'm going to bring you on a journey. But first, I would like to tell you more about some terms, particularly the title, that is the iconography of Phytoalimurgia. Phytoalimurgia is an Italian word. It was created in 1767 because that was the period in which, between the independence wars and later the two world wars, there was a scarcity of food. People needed to find food, and where did they find it? In the countryside, and it is vegetable plants, wild plants. So Phytoalimurgia is phyto from Greek, meaning plants, like in phytotherapy. And alimurgia is this term created by Sergio Targioni-Tozzetti, who wrote a book to help women find food for their children. But later, in more recent times, this term, alimurgia, has become a sort of science. That is, the science, the study of wild plants. And since wild plants have always been the main theme for human beings, both as food but mostly as medicine, before speaking of the Voynich manuscript in the second part of this journey, I would like to take you with me into an excursus of what an herbarium is and why wild plants are so important and necessary for us. The first herbarium ever, according to scholars and studies throughout history, was by a man called Crateva, or Crateva, or Kratiwas. He was Greek, and he was a simple man interested in plants. And King Mithridates IV, who was a king of Pontus, that is a region between Greece and Turkey, called him, wanted him to work for him, basically to try drugs. That is, yeah, exactly. He was called rhizotomikon, which is a Greek word meaning the forager of roots, because they believed that roots were the main part of where the energy of the plant is collected. And so the part of the white plant that is full of energy and compounds, useful compounds. So even if at the beginning you may think that wild vegetable species are mainly considered as food, actually in ancient times they were mainly considered as medicine. So we have Crataeus, and it was called a rhizotomicon. Unfortunately, as it often happens, this first herbarium has been lost. But we need to talk about this manuscript because it was the very first one to be illustrated in real nature. That is, Crataeus went into the countryside, analyzed the plants, and drew them directly from real life. Why this is important? Because later on, plants will not be illustrated from real life anymore, and we will see why it is important. Immediately after, there will be Theophrastus, and after that, the most important persons in the history of wild plants and later botany. That is Dioscorides in 77 with the Materia Medica, more than 100 plants, wild plants illustrated. And here you can see an example. And the first manuscript of the Materia Medica was the last one to be illustrated from real life. Later on, all the manuscripts until early Renaissance will be copies of copies. And this is a big problem because all the plants found in manuscripts are not the same as in real life. And this will bring also problems for persons who went into the countryside and tried to identify plants, because the comparison was not right. Also, it is important to consider Plinius the Elder with Naturalis Historia, but then there's a moment in history in which there is a kind of, let's say, change. That is, all those manuscripts were copies and they were written in Latin. They belonged to the Greco-Roman world, so there was almost nothing of real life, real persons. What happens is, some examples. The Codex Anicia Julianae is extremely important because it's called Anicia Julianae, that was a Byzantine, the daughter of a Byzantine emperor, and this is a copy of Dioscorides, the Materia Medica, perfectly made for a woman. That is, this is particularly to be highlighted because there was a need for a woman to identify plants and understand their use. Moreover, what is interesting about that copy is that it presents the names of the plants, both in Greek, Latin, but also, for example, in Dacian, that is in local languages. And this is a step forward. A step forward that brings us to Macer Floridus in the 11th century. Why Macer Floridus is important? Because the Viridus Herbarum, that is this manuscript written by this person, that is probably, it's a nickname. We really actually don't know if he was the one to write this manuscript. For the first time we have a manuscript in which plants are illustrated, but they are described as an educational poem. So you see that plants are always linked to languages and to poetry. And later on, always in the 11th century, in Western France, so this is where the title was, in the Germanic areas, because there were the Franks, there were Germanic people. Today we have boundaries, but then boundaries were not so strict. There was a man called Odo Magdunensis who created a manuscript with 60 plants. And for the first time, something changes. No more Greek and Roman world, but the normal use of people in continental Europe. In the very same period, something extremely important happens. That is, the very first herbal see it here. I just choose this illustration because it is one of the 4th manuscripts of the Old English herbarium. And why did I choose this one? Because here you can see 2 wild plants that even today newspapers and magazines create a kind of shocking people because they are very similar. In Italian we say toxic twins. That means that they are very similar, but one is poisonous and can bring to death, and the other one is edible. On the left you see Ramson's wild garlic, Allium ursinum, and on the left Convallaria maialis, that is the lily of the valley. They share the same habitat, and foragers, people would like to forage them and don't know the difference, can't understand that it's called the systematic, that is the shape of their leaves, can be mistaken. In the Anglo-Saxon period, they brought together those 2 wild plants in the same manuscript, showing the differences. So as you can see, there's the bulb for Allium garlic and rhizomes for the lily of the valley. The shape of the leaves is different, and also here you can see some, let's say, blooms, even if there are no flowers. Those are just examples, but Anglo-Saxon herbals are fundamental in the history of what will become to be botany. Because, let's make another example. Here we see in Cotton manuscript Vitalis II, the so-called English herbarium tracing back to 1025, there is a key illustration, and the word in the center is nedre. Nedre in modern English is an adder, that is a snake. They considered it to be a viper, but not because the viper was in the British Isles, but since because always the same story, a copy from the Greek-Roman world. But what is interesting here is that we have a plant. Actually, the plant is not named. There's a snake in the middle, which means that it is the most important aspect of the illustration. And then there's another beast. This is a language, and this is iconography. Iconography is just as Old English or Modern English, and people in ancient times were able to understand it, to read it through the lines. Nedre means the serpent, and the hidden meanings here are at least 2. The first one is that where you see the snake, that plant grows. That is the very same habitat. At the same time, if the snake bites you, that is the plant useful to cure you. And the beast on the right means if the snake bites you, you become like a wolf, like a beast. I don't know if you know berserkers. Berserkers were believed to be like bears or wolves. According to plants, they say that's hallucinogenic plants or some other plants that created changes in the human body. Later on, science will demonstrate that actually there are some plants that can create changes to the nervous system. So that plant you see on the left was called Nedrewirt. That is, the wirt stays for wort, for herb, the herb of the snake, but basically that plant is common basil. And it has been demonstrated by science that an infusion of a particular species of basil can be useful to treat snake bites. Then there's the Lacnunga, which is a part of the Old English document manuscript, and there's also the leech, Book of Ball. And who is a leech? Today, in modern English, leech is an animal who helps in, let's say, sucking blood. But then, basically, he was a physician, a doctor. And in fact, let's say, for example, in Anglo-Saxon, the lechefinger, that is, the lechefinger was the finger of the doctor, of the physician, because in it there's a vein going straight to the earth. And all was connected with blood. There's another manuscript, early manuscript 585. It's called commonly Verstice. With Verstice is something pagan, something linked to everyday life and everyday beliefs of the Anglo-Saxon. And this is the manuscript in which they say that from the air there are elves, Egtessen, that is witches, or the Michtigan Vif, that is the mighty wives, that strike arrows. This is a kind of metaphor to say that from air, rheumatisms can come to our back. And there is a cure. Yesterday we were with some students creating this salve that is described. And what did they use? They used wild plants. White bread, that is plantain, Plantago lanceolata, red nettle, that is red nettle, Lamium purpureum, and feverfuge, that is feverfuge, Tanacetum partenium. What is interesting to know about those three plants is their shape, and so again, iconography, because the leaves of those plants are like spears, so arrows. So if the Mitigan Vif strike an arrow, the cure is a plant having the shape of an arrow. Words and words are connected. Later on, in the 13th and 14th century, some different manuscript will be made with strange images, and considering the Voynich manuscript, many scholars have said that those illustrations seem to be made by children or are strange because they can't find something similar in reality. Actually, it's quite clear if one knows how to read them. For example, the second one, there are skulls, both in the leaves and both in the roots, but not in the flowers. That means the plant is poisonous, but flowers are not. Iconography, a language to teach people, even if they don't know the name of the plant or they don't know where to find it, how to use it. The most common illustration is that of mandrake. The two aspects I want to highlight are this one, which is one of the most common so-called esoterical manuscript. You see there are so many squares in the leaves. Actually, there's a plant that even now is in bloom in the botanical gardens, that is Fritillaria. It has a bulb below. It's a poisonous plant, but it's commonly known as snakehead. So all those aspects in iconography are linked to let people know visually if the plant is edible, is a cure, or is poisonous or deadly poisonous. And then there's him, the dragon, which Anglo-Saxon already had called in so many aspects and so many times. And you can see in so many manuscripts the roots as dragon, or the dragon near the plant. Another last aspect I want you to reflect on, because it's extremely interesting. Unfortunately, we don't have time enough to speak about that, is the presence of some peculiar beings that are not properly beasts. This one, for example, near a root, is the symbol of the zodiac sign of Capricorn, which at the beginning was illustrated combining a snail and a goat. Today Capricorn is just a goat. But in the first manuscripts, there was a snail. The period of the year, the season in which you can find both animals, and particularly snails. Why is that symbol near the root? Because even today, in the so-called foraging calendar, what is below the ground, underground, needs to be foraged from the end of autumn to the end of winter. One is the sign of Capricorn, December and January. So everything is connected. And now, I told you about the dragon. Here we have a folio from the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript is a codex that has been radiocarbon dated to the 14th century, even if only some folios have been radiocarbon dated in order not to damage the manuscript. It has been described as the undecipherable manuscript. But actually I think that it's been called this way because the writing that here you can just see in a few lines and later on you will see better, it's a strange script, but actually it's not. One first suggestion is that vowels are Latin vowels and are exactly the same. The only vowel that hasn't been identified is U, but there's a reason why, because in the 14th century there was still a problem between U, V, double V that would have come later. So it's obvious that you can't find that vowel yet. Why this plant? Because this plant, which is quite easily identifiable for those who know white plants, has got a dragon below, and it is not a later drawing, it's by the same illustrator. This small dragon has got a tongue his tongue coming out of his mouth. This same iconography is present in many medieval manuscripts, exactly in the same way. What does that mean? He's licking the plants because he is connected with the plant, and in fact, today the plants have got names. It was Linnaeus in 1753, so later would have decided the principal name and family name of the plant. But already at the time, 14th century, that plant had a link with a dragon. Today it's called Artemisia dracunculus, meaning it's an Artemisia wormwood, or vermouth in German. Dracunculus belonging to the dragon. And that's a reason, because it's a very good plant. I've written Groot, that was the very first alcoholic beverage made by man. The word written in runic characters is alu, which is the forefather of ale. And vessel of fermentation, because that word in runic characters has been found recently in the so-called vessels in the south of Sweden, in which the intoxicating beverage made with Artemisia dracunculus has been found. And there was a dead body of a woman embracing this kind of, let's say, a big jar, where inside there were rests of this alcoholic beverage. Artemisia from Artemis, that is Mother Earth, that is nature, that cures. And it's considered a moon plant that cures women ailments. But also, as in Anglo-Saxon times, the dragon was the serpent of the world, as for the Greek, the Ouroboros. So you see, it's a kind of mythology going on through history, but shaped differently according to the beliefs of the people. And here we are. This is one of the first plants I have identified. Actually, I told you that the Voynich manuscript is composed by 4 treatises. The third one is a kind of agronomic codex in which plants are illustrated in parts. That is, you find roots, you find stalks, you find fruits, you find, you know the plants divided, white plants. Here, this is the illustration from this part of the manuscript. And before considering the language, let's consider iconography. You will probably see something strange. That is, the root is very peculiar. It has claws and hair like a beast. And so the first thought was a wolf, maybe? a dragon doesn't have scales, so no, probably a wolf. And then there's a caption, luckily. And the caption, I put them there, reads, Kikerbes, X-I-X-E, that number 8 can have different meanings. It's a Tyronian note. Tyronian notes were those, you know, like I told yesterday, for example, the symbol of Bluetooth it's called a bind room, that is two characters together to create another one. It's exactly the same. Tyronian notes were kind of mix of different parts of different characters together to mean something else. In this case, that number 8 corresponds to RB. So Kikerb, and number 9, let's call it number 9, was a common Tyronian note even in Latin manuscripts to mean os or us, or simply vowel plus s, or even s plus vowel according to the area in continental Europe. So, Kikerbes or Kikerbse, and let's first analyze this one, because this word, even today, Kikerbse, is Bavarian dialect meaning chickpea. That is a plant of the bean family, Leguminosae. And iconography doesn't lie. The stalk and the leaves are exactly of a white plant of the family of the Leguminosae. Then there's the second word, XO, the glyph that is composed by H and L. L is easily identifiable as you would write today, is the same letter, and final O. That word reads cochlor. Cochlor may remind you of cauliflower or Latin caulis, meaning stalk. And in fact, this part of the codex is showing, illustrating the stalks of several plants. So basically, here it is saying the stalk of the chickpea. But then again, let's go back to iconography. There's a root with hair and claws. Lupine is a plant of the same family. So maybe iconography can show that this plant has something to do, lupine means of the wolf, so maybe this plant is suggesting something about the wolf. But then the very first plant in the manuscript has got exactly the same roots, so it's the same plant species. And here iconography helps us. Two kinds of leaves, the green and the, let's say, orange one, even if the coloring is not properly, I mean, it would have been thicker when the illustrator drew it. Then there's the root, the stalk, the long stalk, and above something that scholars understood as a berry, as a flower. There are only two plants in the Leguminosae family bringing dark fruits that are actually seeds. The first one is Cicer arietinum, that is the black chickpea, and the second one is another species I'm going to tell you about. This is the very first time in human history that a manuscript illustrates botanical sheets and the 4 seasons altogether. We have spring in the green leaves. The wilted, that is orange leaves, are for the end of the season, so let's say summer, autumn. The roots are winter because, as I already told you, roots have to be foraged from the end of autumn until the end of winter. And then there's the part below of the, let's call it seed, the part below that represents the flower, so late spring, beginning of summer, and the dark part on the top, that is the seed. The other vegetable species bringing dark seeds is called Vicia oroboides, which is a common pulse And that, in Italy, I'm telling you about Italy for a reason I will explain later, is only found in a place that is at the boundary with Austria and Slovenia. Vicia Orgoida is present in 2 stations only, in 2 places only. Why am I telling you this? Because in the last folio, folio 116 verso, there is the so-called subscription. Medieval manuscripts, all manuscripts, had their information in the last folio. Normally, you know, when today you buy books, you see the title, the author, the publisher on the first page, and the date of the publishing date on the second. In the medieval period, everything, all of this was in the last folio. And the last folio, scholars have read something like Vox Leben, which has no meaning, but also because there's no punctuation, so it's extremely difficult to understand words. But the first sentence in last folio specifically tells you where the Voynich manuscript was made. Box is Alemannic dialect for book. So the manuscript, the codex. The scholar said Boxleben. Actually, it's box lesen, because you know that B is similar to double S in German, you know, the big S. Box lesen, book lesen, means the book, the codex, has been collected, has been created. Then the rest of the sentence that wasn't transliterated until now reads on, that is quite similar to English upon, and in Alemannic dialect, or better in Italo-Deutsch, that is Middle High German, means on something of a place, referring to a place. And the last word, which is not easily identifiable looking at a manuscript, but with the modern computers can be analyzed and identified, says put Ufer. Ufer is like over, but in Middle Age German meant the banks of a river. And that put, if the first word pox is book, then this word put is put, that is the initial P becomes B. This is Germanic philology law that creates differences between different dialects, and the dialects in southern Germany are extremely difficult to identify because they have so many similar words, but basically this sentence in the last folio means that the codex has been collected on the banks of the river But. And the river But do exist in only one place in the world, at the boundary of Austria, Italy, and Slovenia. Exactly the place where this plant is. It's an endemism of that area. But there's more, because going on, I repeat what many scholars have said, that is that those drawings are not of real plants. If you look at this one, I think you can easily understand what plant it is. It is looking at the flower. Many years ago, it was still present in cornfields together with poppy. This is cornflower, that is Centaurea chanus. And here again, iconography shows us the 4 seasons, that is, and help for people looking at the plant to understand how the way the plant changes through the 4 seasons. We have green leaves, spring, wilted leaves, autumn, the end of the season. The smaller leaves, spring and also even summer, and then the flowering bloom, summer, and again, its roots, winter. But this time, roots represent something peculiar. And many people have said, oh no, they're just crazy drawings. Actually, today science demonstrated that cornflower infusion and cornflower medicines are helpful for our eyes. those are our eyes, saying that the whole plant, that is, the root where the energy is, can be used to cure eyes ailments. This is the so-called doctrine of the signatura, dottrina delle segnature. Even today, English, modern English, you say, you put a signature, that is, your name, your signature, to qualify something, to say that that is yours. That those were the signs to explain to people how to read nature. Plants so were food, but were also cured through food. And this is another very nice example. This is another centaurea, pink rose. Also this one is an endemism from Carnia, the place where the manuscript has been, that is on the banks of the Dut River. And here we have a specific link to Rhizotomicon, that is to the collector of roots. Because this is the root of Centaurea, but it's shown like a small man, a small human being, with a specific color, the color of blood. And what is also interesting is that this blood goes up to the stalks, and in fact science has recently demonstrated that from this plant a spiritual liqueur is made that helps in liquefying blood. Now something a bit different, because we're seeing plants as a cure. Blood vessels, that is the main thing that plants are curing, because probably that was the main concern in that period, to purify themselves. But the problem is that in the Voynich manuscript there are also some plants that, according to historiography and scholars, would have been discovered only after the discovery of America, such as Passiflora cerulea, passion flower. The manuscript has been carbon dated to the 14th century, so before the discovery of America. But here, this plant is illustrated. It reminds us something like, I don't know if you know, the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, where on the bas-relief of the columns there are corn and aloe, which would have been discovered only later. So this might open new scenarios in the history of plants. And also another important aspect is this plant. It is the Anglo-Saxon feverfew, Tanacetum parthenium, which in iconography is extremely strange, because apart suggesting the head, you see the round stalk, that this means the head. And in fact this plant is used to cure migraines, headache. But the root shows an eagle. And I still have to properly identify this, because on one side this could mean the symbol of Austria or Germanic countries, but also the double eagle is the symbol of the country of the eagles, that is Albania, which is quite near actually. Or at the same time meaning the strength this plant gives you. Here another aspect yet, which is interesting and funny at the same time. There are two plants together in the same folio. That plant is the so-called dragonwort, or dragontea in Anglo-Saxon times. It's arum, it's called arum, SPP, that is multiple species. And in fact, in the Anglo-Saxon manuscript, Old English herbarium, there is a description of this plant that says that the blood of the dragon, Drakenblode, on the lande de man Apulia nemned, can be found in a land called Apulia. This suggests, as I told you before, there were no boundaries. And in fact, let's think the Archbishop of Westminster, of Canterbury, came to Bari, Apulia, when the main Basilica of St. Nicholas was inaugurated. So they were in contact. And also the Scuola Medica Salernitana, the medical school from Salerno, knew very well about Anglo-Saxon herbals and about, in general, the Germanic medicinal law. Here the plant is together with a strawberry leaf. The shape is that of the strawberry leaf, Fragaria vesca, but there's just the leaf and not the fruit. Why? Because everybody knows how a strawberry is and can easily identify it in the fields and forage it. But probably less people know that strawberry root can be foraged when the leaf is wilting, so it's red, so it's autumn, that is the period when we can start foraging roots, which have the period in which they have more energy, and is useful to cure a lot of ailments. Why the arum, the dragonwort? Because they grow together in the same places. And dragonwort leaf is much larger. So a person who doesn't know plants in the field would see before the arum leaf and only later below the strawberry leaf. It's a kind of suggestion to say where you can find it and when you can forage that. And this is the last one, and this is one of my favorite. I would have liked to tell you so much more about so many other plants and also the calendar, but there's not so much time. I'm going to tell you about this plant, which I think is quite easily identifiable too. It's called Berberis vulgaris, barberry. It's very common as hedges, to separate plants. And here again, the bush, the green leaves, spring. The flowers up there, that is late spring, beginning of summer. All the fruits called cora red, you can see them there. And the first word in the third paragraph reads something like podam. And again, in Mitteldeutsch, in this kind of dialect of this area, near a place called Timau, Tichelbong, which has been a kind of closed village for so many centuries, where first Alemannic people of the 13th century settled, and their language remained almost untouched. That plant is called Poaselbaum, Peiselbaum, or Peiselbaum. You see so many differences, but actually those are dialects, and they were naming it that way. Actually, the name of the plant, I told you before, the number 8 is a Tyronian note, and inside has got so many different letters. That is Poaselbaum, that is Berberis vulgaris. Again, iconography. You see the root of the plant? There are two snakes. This plant was used in Germanic lore and Germanic phytotherapy against snake or scorpion bites to cure. There are so many plants showing this, and there are so many aspects to be considered. One last thing I want to tell you is about the third part of the manuscript, in which I suggest you to go there and see the second folio of the so-called balneological treatise, in which above on the left there's a sentence which you can easily read, because it says bat dat, that is a bath. It's a balneological treatise. There are thermae, springs, and women paths, as in the ancient pagan lore of those places. It's a bit difficult to read it, but actually, especially German people can find it easy because there are all the articles, demonstrative articles, then the conjunction, that is the end, is not and or und like modern German, but it traces back to Germanic dialects, very ancient Germanic dialects, and it corresponds to Swedish, modern Swedish och. It's present everywhere, this word ox, meaning och, that is conjunction. So once you eliminate the veil and start to understand that vowels are the same, L is the same, M, N are the same, it's quite easy to read it. And it traces back to a period in which botany was just starting to flourish. And in fact, immediately after, the place on the But River where this manuscript was collated would have become part of the Serenissima, that is the Republic of Venice. And thanks to all the ships coming from the Middle East, many seeds and plants would have arrived in Venice. And in fact, a few years later, the very first botanical garden in the world would have been created in Padua. And in Padua, today, there are 80,000 manuscripts, very similar to this one, tracing back to the very same period. Another aspect, the last thing I want to tell you, is that there is a Bavarian manuscript by Vitus Auslasser, that was a churchman, basically, who illustrated the plants as in the Polish manuscript, writing all their names in all Germanic dialects. And by comparing those names, you can find them here too. I leave you, thanking you for listening to me, with this rota, with this diagram showing the 4 seasons. Because today we do not observe anymore. Today we live in our only habitat, but we are not able to read it anymore. And we probably aren't able to understand the differences season by season. The cosmic 4 that always was important for the human beings. And at the center, in the middle, at the core, there's the moon. And you can see there is, on the left, summer, then there's autumn with the harvest, winter, the figure of the person has got a kind of yellow ball in the hand, the time of the solstice, where everything comes around again. And then spring with the first products of the land. Thank you very much for listening. There are different colors in flowers, that is, Berberis vulgaris is not a species only, there are many, and please recall that all seasons are showed in a botanical sheet. So this is a kind of, the flower is wilting to let the fruits, which is the most important part of the plant we need to know about, be highlighted. Also, they were not properly illustrated There are some plants, for example, there's artichoke, which has not a violet flower, probably because they didn't have pigments, but also because they were not interested in making a photograph. They were interested in showing iconography, that is symbology, as in the Middle Ages was quite normal to do.
As long as we're discussing this one, is there relevance to why one's not coloured in?
Can you repeat, please?
One of the plants is not coloured in.
So one of the plants is not colored.
Yeah, just next to the text.
Are you referring to the fruits? Or?
Yeah, fruits.
Yeah,
sorry.
fruits.
Or is it maybe like not pollinated? Or
Because that one is unripe.
ah,
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the third, you said there were 4 codices in the Voyage manuscript. Is the third one the only one you're currently looking at sort of deciphering, or are you looking at any of the rest of them?
So he's saying, I'm just repeating for the people at home who can maybe not hear us. So in one of the people in the audience is asking, so you're saying that there are 4 treatises in the manuscript. So are you looking to into deciphering all of them or just one
No,
of them?
absolutely all of them. And also what is quite strange is that even if I'm interested in wild plants, the first word I identified was that of a constellation. Also because, there are many, Isidore of Seville named them rote, but actually later they would have been called the diagrams, all the rounds like this one. All the round symbolic wheels to show something, and in the Middle Ages they mainly show something about astrology and astronomy that were linked together. And in one of this, unfortunately I can't show you now the picture, I think it's folio 68 recto. There's a kind of kite made of stars with 7 stars, and there's a caption saying Baltis. Baltis is the ploughmen, and it was the first constellation to be visible above the horizon at the beginning of spring. And beside there's another big star with the orange center, which is one of the easily visible stars in the sky, even on a naked eye. And it's Arcturus, which is near Bootes, which we see from the Earth with an orange center. And the caption below says Arcturus, Arctos, Tries, Trade. So it's, for me, it's quite identifiable because once you learn how to read it, words come out. Also, in the balneological treatise, there are rainbows, and the caption is something like, I translate in English, it's gliding bow, gliding bow, in mythology. So yeah, all 4 treatises.
Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Eleonora. That was fascinating. I've just got one question that something you said that struck me. At the beginning, you mentioned that the first trick is obviously that plants were observed.
Yeah.
And they were drawn, illustrated in real life, but then that stops, but then that goes back again.
That
Can you
goes
just
back
say
again.
a little bit more about that and how and why you think then this happens? There is this need to go back to real life observation.
Okay.
So can I repeat for
Yeah.
people at home? So they were asking if you can repeat and say a little bit more about why at the beginning that you were copying and drawing from nature, but then they stopped and started copying illustrations from manuscripts, and then they start again looking at nature and drawing from there.
Okay. Nice question. Very interesting also for me to explain this, because when there was a Roman Empire, almost everything was set. That is, they lived thinking to the classical age. So for them that was perfection, and they didn't want to change it. Then the planets. Thanks to the Scuola Medica Salernitana, the history of medicine coming from Africa with Constantine the African or with Isaac Israeli from the Arabic countries, there were new theories, new ideas, and they were in continental Europe somehow shocked, saying probably we should start again to study this. Also because many seeds and plants were arriving from those countries. Let's think to all those amazing Arabic manuscripts showing, for example, different species of palm trees and dates. So they saw those manuscripts and they saw differences and they understood that there was more and they started studying again. The moment of shift probably was with the first discoveries linked to the sky and to the environment, because nature is our environment, so they go together. And then there was, microcosm, microcosm. It was a continuous search to try to understand the place we live in. And so vegetable species were the core in a way. You're welcome.
Another question here? Hugh?
Thank you very much for your talk. What would you say about the readership of your manuscript? I mean, was this for physicians or apothecaries, or was it an expression of knowledge, a Plinian type of expression of encyclopedic knowledge?
So I'm just repeating the question. So what's the readership of the manuscript? It's encyclopedic or for physicians or just show off for knowledge?
Thanks for your question, because this is something I'd like to tell you more about. Since according to the last folio, the identification of the place in which it was made, also according to its language, and also according to some illustrations in the so-called agronomical treatise, where there are some boxes illustrated, some similar to paper or leather boxes, and some others similar to the so-called samovar. The area is extremely, specific, and also due to the dimensions of the manuscript, which actually is a portable book. It's very small. It probably belonged to the so-called kramars. Kramars are people existing still today. The term is a Middle German dialect, actually. It is present in modern German Kramer, and they were people going through the Alps, that is, in Germany and Austria, and they came back, and they were collector of herbs and of spices. When the Serenissima Venice had so many spices from the Middle East, they had those boxes with spices from abroad, but herbs from the local places, because they were highly requested in Austria and Germany. So probably this was or a book for a person to identify plants in the fields, or I suggest, I don't know, because I still have to transliterate more to understand, to show people, I'm giving you this herb, this is needed to cure that. There's another reason why I say so, because inside the manuscript there's a lunar calendar, and in 1582 is the moment in which the Gregorian calendar would have been created, let's say. So, since this is earlier, it probably means writing the culture of a specific people in a specific place. And moreover, the balneological treatise shows the way on how to link wild plants and herbs with the cure of water. So it's a kind of vademecum, it's a kind of explanation of how to live earthier with nature, following the seasons. At least this is what is shown from illustrations and some sentences. But as soon as more no reference to monotheisms. So probably this is extremely linked to Germanic lore in those places in which people living between the mountains with almost no contact with empires. So probably it could also be a copy of a previous manuscript because there are no mistakes. I think it has been copied from a previous manuscript. So we'll see. Thanks for your question.
Are there any questions here? So there is a question from home. It says, thanks for a great talk. I have a book that translates some of the Anglo-Saxon manuscripts, but there are some names that they could not translate. For example, Herbarictanus Agloaphotis. Is there any way to work out what modern names are?
Oh, I think so. Herbarictanus is Dictamus. In Latin, of course. It depends if the herb is illustrated.
It doesn't say the manuscript, so we
Yeah,
don't
it
know.
depends on the manuscript, on when it was written, who did write it.
It doesn't
And
say
there are
the
so many
source.
variables, but I think that Germanic philology helps in this.
Yeah.
By comparison between all, this is actually what I'm doing. This is how I transliterated the manuscript, because for me it's quite simple. I mean, Old Norse, Gothic, Anglo-Saxon, Old English, all compared, and you can at the end find a right word. I'm not considering reconstructed Proto-Germanic except on a comparison basis, because it is reconstructed by man, so it's not a real language, but it can help. I think, except some very specific words, it doesn't happen in Old English. It also happens, for example, there's a vegetable species called silphium in Greek, that even today botanists and historians of botany are becoming crazy trying to understand what plant is this. They think it's a ferula, but probably it is no more present in this world. So this aspect also should be considered.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any more questions? No?